Sashmini Anuradha from the Leah Club of University of Colombo. Welcome to the 15th episode of Detect and Correct, which is the initiative taken by the Leah Club of University of Colombo to discuss crucial and debatable topics in the present context. As you all know by now, we are linking two platforms, YouTube and our official newsletter, which is in written form to make this discussion series easily accessible for you. Today, we are going to talk about talking in English versus social phobia. To talk in depth on this topic, we are collaborating with Ms. Ruth Surendraj, a probationary lecturer in the Department of English Language Teaching, University of Colombo, who is well experienced in teaching English language to the undergraduates in University of Colombo. Ma'am, we warmly welcome you to the Detect and Correct. In order to start the discussion, ma'am, I invite you to give a brief introduction of yourself.
Thank you very much, Sashmini, for that introduction. I'm Ruth Surendraj, again as explained from the DELT of the University of Colombo. Basically, I teach in both the arts faculties as well as the management faculties, teaching those who learn English as a second language. I graduated from the University of Colombo with a degree in English. So I did a kind of field jump when I joined the teaching English as a second language field. Currently, I'm pursuing a master's that is focused on teaching English as a second language. And so that's what I do.
Okay, wonderful, ma'am. You're an amazing personality. Thank you very much for joining us today. So first of all, let us start the discussion starting why one should not be afraid of talking in English and making mistakes when learning English.
So let me start by just talking to you a little bit about learning itself, right? I know in the school system, we're so used to thinking of learning as a process where we have to get all our answers correct. But real learning, if you notice, mistakes are almost always the place where we learn and we learn in such a way that we don't forget that knowledge after that. So depending on the kind of feedback you get and the kind of positive, constructive comments that you get when you make a mistake, any type of learning, a mistake is a place to relearn what you have misunderstood. So in general, learning should be about making mistakes and learning from those mistakes. And so for me, although we want to be perfect, language learning is also very much about a process of adding to your existing knowledge, right? So you don't just end up knowing everything the first time you talk. The first time you hear a foreign language, it sounds extremely odd when you listen to it, right? But once you're an advanced learner, you realize that so many mistakes that you made have actually helped you get to a place where you understand the language. And so that's how language learning works for any language. And English is not very different. We have a specific fear attached to English because we see it as a status symbol. We see it as something that gets us jobs. So we also have this fear attached to it. But really the fear of learning is actually getting in the way of you learning the language itself. So that's why I think it's important to think of this fear more as a, it's stopping you from learning rather than actually helping you to make the common mistakes that any learner would make and learn from that process.
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am, for that explanative answer. I think our viewers got a correct and clear answer for why we should not be afraid of talking in English. So with that, my second question is, speaking is one of the most desirable skills that English learners want to develop. However, in our context, they do not see English as a necessity, but rather as a curious task to want to pursue. As an expert on the field, how do you see the importance of developing English speaking skills as students who learn English, and especially the undergraduates who study in English medium?
So I'm going to answer this question a little bit differently from the usual answer you might get, right? I am going to ask us to think about English being a necessity only in certain areas of our life, right? So most likely for all of us, for most of us at least, English is not the language we speak at home, right? We speak either Sinhala or Tamil. And those are the languages we use to communicate with people who are very close to us. English comes into the picture either when we are going to have, let's say, education, right? Or sometimes employment, right? And even in employment, I think in Sri Lankan societies, if you're planning on becoming somebody who climbs the ladder and becoming someone who holds a higher post, only then will you realize that there is a need for English, because more meetings or client interviews, things like that happen in English. So it's, while you're starting out your job, you may not necessarily see English as a necessity, because it may not be, right? So you may be at a place where you can conduct all of your work in Sinhala or Tamil, and that is fine, right? In that case, a student who is going for a job like that does not need to see English as a necessity, okay? But if you are thinking of getting higher jobs, then you will realize that English becomes almost a skill. Like now, you have to learn to use email and computers, right? Those are necessary things, the basic things for us. So English becomes that when you start climbing the ladder. And so it is a necessity. You may not see it as a necessity now, right? But if you want to, because our society connects good jobs with English, right? Then it's a problem if you want to get a good job, but you don't really want to work on learning the language that might give you that plus, that additional point, right? I'm saying this also because everybody looks for different kinds of employment. So depending on the type of thing you want, you can, or you don't have to see English as a necessity, right? Let's take, for example, you want to do higher studies, let's say in the USA. If you go there, right, then you will, at that point in your life, English becomes a necessity because you have to function, right? But if you're not going out of Sri Lanka for your higher studies, you can function very well without really investing in learning English. So I think learners must also set realistic goals for themselves. Do you really think that English is a necessity for you, right? If you think it is, then you need to make sure that things like speaking, communicative skills, they are part of what you want to practice and work on as an undergraduate in your university. Did I answer your question?
Yes, exactly, ma'am. Like you said, as an undergraduate, we must develop and improve our English speaking skills to have better opportunities in our life. Okay, with that, my next question is, all too often, people spend all of their time studying grammar and memorizing lists of words instead of actually going out there and putting what they have learned into practice. But anyone who has taken the plunge and moved away from home to study English or moved abroad to work or travel will tell us just how quickly their English skills improve. So, ma'am, do you agree to the idea that while studying the written language is still hugely important, especially for improving grammar and building our vocabulary, the most effective learning still happens face to face?
Yes, absolutely, right? Even we are sometimes very confused because our students, when we come to teach them, they love learning grammar, right? And some of them really know the structures. They can, if you say, give me a passive voice sentence, some of them will just, give you the entire formula for how to construct the verb for the passive voice, right? Mm-hmm. But somehow that kind of knowledge doesn't translate into the actual real life situation when they have to use passive voice, in maybe a presentation on an academic paper. then they find it very difficult to translate those skills into a real world scenario. So let me go back to your question, right? There's also slight difference when we go to a country where people are speaking in English, and we are surrounded by people who all speak English, right? The difference in learning in a situation like that is that you're constantly hearing. Even if you go to the shop to get dinner, you have to use English to get your vegetables, to talk to your landlord, right? Even the most basic things, to get a ticket to go from one place to the other, you need to know English, right? So in a situation like that, English is extremely important, and people, because they are in that situation, everybody speaks English, they are sort of given an incentive to learn the language really fast. So you always find, if you go into a place that speaks a language, you learn the language faster because you're constantly hearing it, right? And that has to do with the connection we have to exposure to a language. Like, for example, I always tell my Sinhala friends who want to learn Tamil, they come and say, teach me Tamil. I'm like, no, I can't teach you Tamil. Go to a Tamil village and stay there for 3 months. You learn Tamil, right? Because being in the situation is important. Now in Sri Lanka, there's a slight difference because we don't really see, we're not surrounded by English, okay? So maybe if your faculty teaches only in English medium, then for the time that you are on campus, you will hear English, right? But most probably not in the canteen. You're probably talking in Sinhala or Tamil, right? Even in the workplace, when you put a lunchtime chat to your colleague, you're probably going to switch into a language that you all are both comfortable with, right? So we are not always surrounded by English in Sri Lanka. And that's, I think, a huge barrier in a sense, because if we were surrounded by English, we learn it faster, right? So learners also have to keep that in mind and remember that sometimes the English teaching or learning classroom is the only place where they get to really talk about their problems with learning and things like that, right? So I would suggest that you see how you can improve the amount of times that you speak English in a day, right? For example, you can say, okay, within these 2 hours in the day, I'm going to speak to every person I meet only in English. It doesn't matter if I'm wrong, I decide that and I stick to it. And it can be, a horrible experience, but it matters that you try it. So because we don't have this surrounding where we are always speaking English, we have to build in extra mechanisms to help us learn the language.
Okay, amazing, ma'am. Thank you so much for that motivational answer, which is full of practical examples. And now I would like to ask my next question. So, which is, some people have the ability to get into a conversation in English language with such ease and confidence. Even if they don't have a rich vocabulary, chatting casually is no problem for them. On the other hand, some people are afraid of speaking in English due to their fear of failure, being misunderstood, and grammar mistakes. And for them, making mistakes feel like failure. So, ma'am, what are the most effective ways to overcome this fear of speaking in English?
Yeah. So obviously, it also depends on the kind of personality you are, right? First of all, if you are anyway an easygoing, sort of more friendly personality, you're more likely to try out new things, right? As opposed to somebody who's very shy anyway. Somebody who's very shy will take longer to try those things out, right? That's a small thing that affects us. But largely, I find that people take themselves too seriously, right? So I ask my students always, why do you have a problem speaking in English? Why don't you just, speak it? It's okay if you make mistakes. And they're always scared of people laughing at them, right? And I'm not saying that this is not true. It is true. Some people will laugh at you and they will do it in a really mean and nasty way that makes you feel bad about your language skills, right? But keep in mind that this can happen in learning any language, right? Any language, people will always be mean about the kind of things that you're getting wrong, right? On the other hand, like say you're learning English in a classroom that is friendly and it's a good experience, you need to push yourself to use that experience wisely, right? So say, for example, you're in a lecture with a lecturer who you know is friendly and helpful, right? And this can be your subject lecturer. You can tell that person, okay, madam or sir, I will be trying to speak in English. If I make any mistakes, please correct me, right? You have to sort of take that step to challenge yourself a little bit also, right? Another idea I always give my students is to say, look guys, why don't you talk to your friends in English? So within the class, within the English teaching classroom, right? That also people are very scared to do. Why? Because they're scared that their friends will laugh at them, right? I ask them, what's the problem? They're your friends, right? Friends always laugh at each other. And sometimes, honestly, the mistakes we make with language are funny, right? So if we are with people who we are comfortable with, it doesn't matter if they laugh at us, because we can also laugh at them when they make a mistake, right? So I think we need to think about becoming a little less serious when we're learning a language. We have to have fun. It's a fun experience if you let it be, right? I will tell you an example from mine. So Sinhala is my third language. So I can speak it quite fluently and understand and read it, and there's no problem at all. But suddenly, your wires get crossed and you don't remember a word when you want to, right? So once in some conversation, I wanted to refer to the banana tree flower, right, which is kehelmua in Sinhala.
Yeah.
And I ended up saying, I was thinking kehelmua, and the thing that came out of my mouth was kehelmala, right? And that was a hilarious joke. Everybody ended up laughing. I could have been insulted at that time because I don't have to speak in Sinhala. I can speak in Tamil, right? But the point is that was a learning experience. Now I'm never going to ever say kehelmala when I'm thinking of kehelmua, right? And I will allow that experience to be a good memory instead of a bad one. So it's about also choosing how we are going to think about our memories and how we are going to use the experiences or process those experiences, right? It doesn't matter if your friends laugh at you. They laugh at each other all the time. And so that fear of making mistakes, you can let it go a little bit when you're with people you're comfortable with, right? So you don't have to try these experiments with people you don't know, but you can try it with people you're comfortable with so that you slowly get used to it, right? So you can try it at home. You can tell your parents, I'm going to talk to you all in English only, right? And they may think that you're odd, but it's okay. You practice with somebody you're comfortable with. And then slowly you find that fear decreases as you go.
Okay, wow, ma'am. It's a very mind-blowing answer. So actually, we do not have to afraid make mistake, because otherwise it's not our native language at all. So all you have to do is believe in yourself and get out of your comfort zone and do continuous practice. So ma'am, with that, we'll come to our final question. From a social cultural perspective, motivation to master English has more to do with the symbolic value attached to English and its value as a cultural capital in Sri Lankan society. In such a society, fear of being judged based on the fluency in English can be a major factor which demotivates a person to speak in English. Do you think it is important? To normalize English communication in such Sri Lankan society to overcome the fear of being judged?
That's a tough question to answer. One, because we have to acknowledge the fact that English is, as you say, it has very high social and cultural capital, right? It is linked to getting a good education, getting a good job, right? And it is also more than that, it's linked to belonging to a particular class that has access to certain privileges, right? So there are layers of all of these dynamics coming into language teaching. So you're not just learning a language, right? Some people try to say that, okay, learning English is just a skill, it's just a language. No, it's not just a language, right? It's also a way to enter a certain class status. And those status symbols are important because they have very real effects on the way people can live their lives. So we need to recognize that is there, right? And even in the English teaching classroom, it comes out even with the way that we pronounce certain words. Okay, you will see that if you're a first language user of English, you will pronounce it a certain way, right? But if you're a second language speaker of English, you are not necessarily speaking English since you were a child, you may have a very different way of pronouncing that same word, right? And you will find that immediately from your pronunciation, people will be like, okay, this person either knows or doesn't know English, right? And those kind of, like you said, those kind of associations are problematic, right? So that's the truth of the matter. But what do we do? Does normalizing English speaking help this? I guess to a certain extent it can, right? So if we just say, okay, it doesn't matter whatever kind of English you speak, right? It doesn't matter whether you pronounce certain words in certain ways. It just matters if you can be understood, right? So there's a group of people who will say that communication is the most important part. If I am speaking English and you speak a different way with a different accent maybe, okay? What matters is that we understand each other, right? On the other hand, though, as learners, we are also conscious of, we're also always asked to live up to certain standards, right? So you might find that as you're advancing in learning, you are correcting your pronunciations to sound more English speaking, right? So that's also a realistic thing that can and could happen when you're learning a language. Normalizing English will not work if we are going to be scared of speaking it anyway, right? So a lot of people will tell you that to listen to Indians speaking English, they do not speak. Sometimes when they speak English, it's hard for anybody else to understand, right? But they're very confidently speaking and they expect to be understood, right? So I think maybe in Sri Lanka, we lack that confidence a little bit. Maybe that's why it happens. I don't know the reason, right? But something keeps us back from really talking and using that space to learn it better. So again, this is a huge debate, right? So I'm trying to give you a fair idea of this huge debate. You know, we have to ask ourselves, whose standards are we going to meet? Am I going to speak? Do I want to learn English so that I can speak like a first language user? Do I want to speak like an American? Do I want to speak like a British person, right? Those are things that are actual debates, right? And people will have different standards. And that's in a sense, that's the beauty of language also. They are always changing, right? Language is always moving. It's growing to reflect the change in our societies, right? So structures, like you said, grammar structures that we consider wrong can become structures that are right over time, right? Just because they're used and then they slip into convention and then they change and become an acceptable form of expression. So we have to keep in mind that while we want to meet these standards are also always changing, right? So that's a good thing to keep in mind about languages, not just about English, but about languages in general. So yes, normalizing speaking in society can help us, but it can help us only to a certain extent. If we are still confused about whose standard we are meeting, then we are always going to have this debate of, you're not speaking good enough English, and she's speaking better English than you, right? So we kind of need to stop doing that to each other. And maybe then there is a space for us to speak English with a little more confidence without having that fear that a lot of my students have about speaking.
Definitely, ma'am. I totally agree with what you have said. And thank you very much, ma'am, for that explanative answer. So with that, we come to the conclusion of our today's discussion on talking in English versus social phobia. So thank you very much, Ms. Ruth Surendranath, for joining us and for giving us the opportunity to conduct this important and valuable discussion despite your busy schedules. We really appreciate it, ma'am. So thank you once again for your time.
You're most welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, ma'am. So we hope that you have gained good knowledge about the topic, talking in English versus social phobia, which will definitely be an asset to your youth as well as for your future career as well. So till we meet with another interesting discussion of Detect and Correct, stay safe and goodbye. Thank you.